For each fight on this weekend's upcoming card, including for the prelims, I'm going to be comparing stats, reviewing recent fighter history, analyzing the results of my 7 data science prediction models, and giving a combined weighted prediction based on those models. I'll also provide my final prediction combining both quantitative and qualitative information together. Later this week, I'll upload a video covering promising underdogs, best and expensive favorites, and prop bets for y'all to consider, which I'll highlight some great opportunities for you guys. Hopefully you can use these predictions and data to confirm your picks, avoid mistakes, find value bets, or just informative and entertainment purposes to prepare for the lead up to this weekend's event. Please like and subscribe if you find this content interesting, informative, or helpful. It helps keep me motivated to create these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you'd like to support the channel through that. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier, which will give you early access to all of the analysis and results for my videos, as well as additional data analysis and stats. So that includes my prediction model results, fighter history, stat overviews, promising underdogs, best and expensive favorites, prop bets to consider, and a deep dive into each fighter's record history and an analysis through each of their individual historical fights. So you'll get all sorts of stats and data analysis which will help you with your picks and bets. And for $20 a month, which is around $5 per event, you can get all of that information. You can purchase event analysis separately, but the membership is cheaper and easier. Plus, you're directly helping improve and expand the content of this channel. Running this data and analysis, each of the prediction models, the fight simulations, and updating the site takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate your support. And thank you all for the recent support that you have shown. It truly means the world to me that we can share our passion for MMA and continue to build this community together. The last thing that I want to mention is that there is a BetUS promotion in the description below. If you use that link, it's an affiliate link, so if you set up your account, you'll get a promotional offer with that. I'm excited to continue working on this analysis and content for you all. Thank you guys again for all of your support. Let's go ahead and dive right into the predictions. So UFC 311 is this weekend. It's going to be UFC's first pay-per-view for 2025, and it is a very technical, heavy, and banger of a pay-per-view, if I'm being quite honest. For the main event, we have our lightweight rematch with Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan. It is a rematch they previously faced in 2019. It was a closely contested fight, so it's interesting seeing them run it back. For our co-main event, we have our bantamweight championship clash with Murad Valashvili. He is facing Umar Nurmagomedov, who is undefeated, and that is a very interesting grappler versus grappler, highly technical fight. We also have former champions Jamal Hill versus Yuri Prohaska, and that's going to be a very interesting fight. Huge implications for the division. And also on the card, we have guys like Payton, Talbott, and Rinya Nakamura, and they have plenty of opportunities to shine on this card and continue their career. One thing that I did want to mention to you guys is I did add the names of the models in order that those percentages are displaying. So for example, the first percentage you see, 68% for Tagir Ulanbekov, that was the result of the linear regression model, which I wrote LIN-R. Then you have your logistics regression model, your random forest result, your neural network result, your gradient boosting result, support vector machine result, and then finally the 1000 simulation result. So that way you guys know which model produced which percentage and you know the order of the models. That is not going to change, but I will display it up there for you guys just so you can reference. I also have the model averages up there and the final percentages, and that's what we're going to use to break down all of the stats. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on this first fight, an absolute banger. We have Tagir Ulanbekov versus Clayton Carpenter. Now, for this fight, I am going with Tagir Ulanbekov at the end of the day. I'm giving him a 74.58% probability of victory. Now, the prediction models gave him a little bit more confidence. They gave him a 77% probability of victory, but I normalized that just a little bit. Now, the statistical reason why I do like Tagir Ulanbekov, keep in mind he has a height advantage of 1 inch here. He does have a reach advantage of 4 inches as well. He lands 0.76 more takedowns on average as well. Now, Ulanbekov, let's just zoom out and look at his total record, which I have added at the very top next to each fighter's name. He has 15 wins and 2 losses. Now let's break that down real quick. Out of his 15 wins, 1 of those was a KO/TKO, 8 of those were submissions, and 6 were decision victories, which does give him a 60% finish rate. Now out of his 2 losses, both of those were decision losses. Now he does have 4 first-round finishes out of his 15 wins. Recently, he's been on a tear. He's won 4 of his last 5 fights, so he has good momentum on his side, and he's won 2 back-to-back fights coming into this fight. So again, a lot of momentum. His most recent win, just keeping in mind, it was December of 2023, so it's been a little bit over a year, and his most recent loss was back in March of 2022, so it's been a while. But let's talk about the non-statistical reasons why I think Tagir Ulanbekov will win this fight. And the first thing that I want to mention, it's just going to be his experience and his overall pedigree as a fighter. keep in mind this guy has trained a lot with former champion Khabib Nurmagomedov, and he's really improved his skills with one of probably the best grapplers ever in MMA history. I'm not saying the best, so let's not start a debate here, but one of the best grapplers, right? Highly skilled. And so that kind of training environment, I'm sure it's given him a lot of tough challenges and ability to improve overall. Now, kind of branching off from that, he has very good grappling skills. I mean, he's a Dagestani fighter. He brings that world-class wrestling and grappling into the UFC. He's very relentless with his takedowns. He does very strong ground control, and that just makes him very difficult for a lot of opponents. Now, his ability to secure those dominant positions and really threaten those submissions that he does throughout the fight, that's going to pose a huge problem for Carpenter, in my opinion. Keep in mind his physical build as well. He does have a height and reach advantage here. He's kind of like slim but tall and towering. And so I think that that's going to really let him control distance in the striking exchanges and kind of make it easier to initiate some grappling sequences against the much shorter Carpenter, right? Now, he also has proven UFC level performance. Now, Carpenter, he is undefeated. Keep that in mind. He's 8 wins, 0 losses. I acknowledge that. But Ulanbekov, he's kind of already started proving himself against UFC caliber opposition. He's faced and defeated several established UFC fighters. He's demonstrated that ability to compete at a pretty good level in the sport. And I think that that kind of high pressure experience and what he brings already to the table is pretty solid overall. Now, strategically speaking, I mean, he's been training with the Eagles MMA, right? And they're really known for strategizing and picking apart their opponents when it comes to fights. And so I expect him to come in with a very well-crafted game plan overall. I mean, his team is really good at like analyzing their opponents and picking off weaknesses and just finding that tactical advantage over opponents. And so I admit Carpenter, he's talented, he's a good prospect, he has a bright future as a fighter, but in this particular fight, I do have to go with Tagir Ulanbekov. I'm going to take him via decision. I don't think he's going to be able to get the finish here, especially when you consider he only has very few finishes overall, right? He has 1 KO/TKO. Now, he does have a high submission rate, but I don't think that's going to be quite effective against Carpenter. I think Carpenter can hold his ground a little bit, but I do see this going to the judges and him getting the decision victory. So that's the final verdict. For the next fight, we have an interesting fight with the up-and-coming Ricky Turcios versus Bernardo Sopaj. Now, for this fight, I did end up going with Sopaj here. I'm giving him an 82% probability of victory. Now, the prediction models ended up giving him about a 79% probability of victory. I did end up bumping that up, but let's talk about the statistical things that I like about Sopaj here. Now, he is 7 years younger. He has a 15% higher striking accuracy. He lands 2.17 more takedowns on average. He has a 50% higher takedown accuracy, and he also has a 5% higher takedown defense. Taking a look at his total record, as you can see at the top, 11 wins and only 3 losses. Let's break those down real quick. Out of those 11 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 were submissions, and 1 was a decision victory, which gives him a very high 91% finishing rate. Now, out of his 3 losses, 1 of those was a KO/TKO, and the remaining 2 were decision losses. Now, he does have 7 first-round finishes out of his 11 wins, which means he's definitely a first-round finisher, but he could also take it to the second round and get the finish there. And recently, he does have momentum on his side as well. He's won 3 of his last 5 fights, although it's important to note he is coming off of a loss into this fight. Now, the most recent time he won was December of 2023, so it's been a little bit over a year now, and his most recent loss was in March of 2024. But let's talk about those non-statistical reasons why I really like Sopaj in this fight and why I think he can defeat Ricky Turcios. So I really like Sopaj's aggressive fighting style, and I think that he has one of those styles that can kind of overwhelm his opponents, especially the right opponent, and I think Turcios falls into that trap a little perfectly. I mean, he's kind of struggled against some of those pressure style fighters in the past, as we've seen. Now, also keep in mind, Sopaj has very powerful striking, especially when it comes to his knockout power. You could see that not only in the stats, but if you replay a lot of his fights, you can tell this guy has power. And I think that that's going to be a huge threat to Turcios, who has shown some vulnerability to strikes in previous fights. Now, keep in mind, Sopaj does train at All Stars Training Center alongside fighters like Khamzat Chimaev and Alexander Gustafsson, and he's very likely sharpened his skills with these guys and his camp and his training partners, and I think that is they're good people to surround yourselves with. You know, no one better to learn from than people who have done it themselves and they've done very well in their own careers, right? Also, keep in mind, Sopaj, he's young, he's hungry, he's a rising prospect. I think that in the psychological department, just to touch base on this real quick, he does have motivation to defeat the slightly more experienced Ricky Turcios, and I think he has what it takes to get it done. I like his ability to mix in striking with those well-timed takedowns, and I think that what that's going to end up doing to Turcios is kind of keep him guessing and prevent him from really settling into a specific rhythm. The rhythm that he likes to settle into, it takes time, but with a guy like Sopaj, I think that that's going to throw him off a little bit. Now, in his UFC debut, Sopaj, he did struggle. I mean, he ended up losing that fight, but I think that if anything, he's going to use that as motivation, just judging by the kind of fighter he is, his training discipline, his training partners. I think that he's going to use that as motivation overall psychologically. So all in all, I mean, his build, his strength, keep in mind, in this division, it's pretty impressive overall, and I think that's going to help him control the clinch if it gets there, and different grappling exchanges as well against the slightly taller Ricky Turcios. So I think he still has an advantage when it comes to a physicality and a strength perspective. But all in all, I'm not thinking anything too fancy. I know he's a huge finisher, but I'm actually going to take Sopaj via decision. I think Ricky Turcios, he deserves a little bit of credit. And I've seen the way he can maneuver and be a little bit defensive and careful. I don't think Sopaj can get the finish here. I wouldn't be surprised if he does, especially statistically speaking. But the way I see this fight play out, just from my human input, the studying that I've done, I'm leaning towards a Sopaj decision. For the next fight, we have Rinya Nakamura versus Muin. Now, for this fight, I did end up going with Rinya Nakamura, and I ended up giving him an 80.7% probability of victory. Now, the prediction models pretty much gave him the same reading. They gave him a 79.5% probability of victory. Here's the statistical things that I really like about Nakamura. He lands 0.5 more strikes per minute. He has a 8% higher striking accuracy. With that, he also absorbs 0.87 less strikes per minute. So in the striking field, this guy is statistically superior. He has a 17% higher striking defense. He also lands 1.77 more takedowns on average. He has a 63% higher takedown accuracy and a 32% higher takedown defense. Taking a look at his record, surprise, surprise, the guy is undefeated. 9 wins, 0 losses. Let's break that down real quick. 5 of his 9 wins came via KO/TKO, 1 was a submission, and 3 were decision victories, giving him an impressive 67% finishing rate. Now, of course, recently he's been on a tear. His most recent win was early in 2024. It was in February of 2024. Of course, he hasn't lost. Now, let me talk about the non-statistical things that I really liked in Rinya Nakamura. So, first of all, the guy comes from a very elite wrestling background. I mean, he's a former U23 world champion in freestyle wrestling, and that definitely helps him in the confidence department and the technical skill department. I think that does set him apart compared to Muin, and that's really why you see the lopsidedness. But there's a lot of other things that I really like out of this kid as well. I mean, I like his knockout power. He's demonstrated some real devastating striking power before with, those multiple first-round KO/TKOs in his career. He also has that undefeated record that we touched base on. And so, he does have the skills and the mentality to keep pushing forward. He's also young. I mean, he's 29 years old. Nakamura, compared to the 32-year-old Gafurov, I mean, this guy, he's not even in his prime yet, and he's already pretty well accomplished overall in professional fighting and wrestling. So, keep in mind, he's carrying a lot of momentum. He has that psychological edge. He's adaptable as a fighter. I mean, he blends in those wrestling skills with really good striking, and that just makes him an overall well-rounded threat with multiple avenues to victory, which I love seeing in fighters when I'm making my picks and doing my analysis. He also does high-level training overall. I mean, he's a product of like Japan's competitive wrestling system, and so I can only imagine the guys he's trained with and the facilities he's worked with and improved with, and improves in his performance and his overall career. So I also like that he kind of has this like finishing instinct. We see that in his record, but also in his style of fighting. I mean, he's able to really capitalize on key opportunities, I mean, in milliseconds of fights, and this guy knows how to finish some fights very quickly. And the reason for that is because of a lot of those opportunities come from his pressure fighting style. He has a very aggressive approach, and I think that someone like Muin, I've seen his fights, I've rewatched a lot of his fights, and I think that that's just going to basically expose some of his vulnerabilities to those pressure tactics that Nakamura is going to use. Last thing I would say, Nakamura, I mean, I think he has mental toughness and grit, and that is what I like to see in the fighters that I pick. I mean, he has that Olympic level wrestling experience and mentality. And so what that proves is discipline. He has a pretty high level background, and I'm interested to see how he continues to do in his professional fighting career. But all in all, final verdict for this fight, I am taking Nakamura via decision. I don't think he gets the finish here, and that's just because what I've seen out of Gafurov, but I do see him getting the decision victory. Wouldn't be surprised again if this guy does end up getting the finish just based on his statistics and his dominance overall, but I don't think that that's going to be the case, and that's just based on what I've seen out of Gafurov and giving him some credit there. For the next fight, we have Karol Rosa versus Ailin Perez. Now, for this fight, I did end up going with Ailin Perez. I ended up giving her a 52.1% probability victory, pretty narrow overall. Now, the prediction models, they were also narrow, but they just tipped over on the other side. They ended up giving Ailin Perez only a 47.1% probability victory. So, it's one important thing to keep in mind. I am going against the models for this particular pick, and there are plenty of reasons I'm going to review as to why I'm doing that. Now, first, touching base on the statistical advantages that Ailin Perez has and that I like, she has a 2% better striking accuracy. She absorbs 3.6 less strikes per minute. That is very important. She has a 8% higher striking defense. She lands 4.16 more takedowns on average and has a 5% higher takedown accuracy. Let's take a look at her total record. 11 wins and only 1 loss. Out of those 11 wins, 4 of them were KOs/TKOs, 2 were submissions, and 5 were decision victories, which ends up giving her a 55% finishing rate. Now, out of her 2 losses, she has a submission loss, which was back in 2022, and she also has a disqualification loss back in 2021. That was against Tamiris Vidal back in Samurai Fight House, one of those events. So all in all, she has 2 technical losses. Now, taking a look at her first round finishes, she has 4 of those out of her 11 wins. Recently, she's been on a tear. She's won 4 of her last 5 fights, currently on a 4-fight winning streak, in fact. Her most recent win was back in September of 2024, so she's pretty active. And her most recent loss was in September of 2022, so it's been a while. Looking pretty good, Ailin Perez. Now, let me tell you guys about the non-statistical things that I really liked in her fighting style. So first off, right off the bat, I really like her grappling advantage. I mean, she's known for her strong wrestling and her takedown abilities, and I think, obviously speaking, it's going to help her control the fight when it comes to the ground. She's also carrying crazy momentum on her side. She has that 4-fight winning streak, and she continues to steadily improve, which I do like to see in the fighters I pick, and that also is going to give her some psychological confidence in this fight. Now, she also has a pretty good finishing ability overall. We saw like 4 fights out of those 11 wins. Not bad, especially when you consider the fact that it is women's MMA. It's kind of rare to see finishing like that. Most victories end up going to the decision when it comes to those types of fights, but she does have finishing ability. I mean, she has that instinct that I really like to see, and I think that that's going to become key, especially if she's able to hurt Rosa, which I am banking on just based on everything I've analyzed. She's also one of those unpredictable type of fighters. I mean, she's that unorthodox style, and when you're in that style, you're very willing to take certain risks that conventional fighters just wouldn't. So I think that she could catch Rosa off guard when it comes to that. Now, last thing, or a few other things I want to mention, she is young. She's 29 years old, whereas Karol Rosa, she is 34 years old, and I think that what that's going to translate to in this matchup, it's going to be a little bit better speed and athleticism coming from her. And she's also pretty motivated in this fight. Keep in mind, she is an underdog in this matchup, and she is facing someone who is a little bit higher, right, up there, and so she has that boost that she's going to use to try to prove herself and make a statement in this prelim fight. So last thing I really want to mention about her, she's very adaptable as a fighter. I think I see a lot of potential there. She's able to change her game plan mid-fight, and I think that when you're a fighter and your initial strategy isn't working, I hope you have a plan B and plan C, because if you only have a plan A, you're going to end up with a loss very quickly. You're going to get humbled, right? So she is adaptable. I like what I see out of her, and if one certain strategy doesn't work against Rosa, I could see her adjusting properly. And so bottom line here, I am taking Ailin Perez. I am going for the underdog here, and I think she's going to get it done via decision. Again, I don't think we're going to see a finish from her. That's just my personal opinion. I think we're going to see a decision victory. For the next fight, we have a interesting fight with Grant Dawson versus Diego Ferreira. For this fight, I ended up going with Grant Dawson and giving him a 74.1% probability victory. And no, I didn't choose him just because he looks tough as hell, which he does. But no, that's not the reason I chose him. I mean, the prediction models gave him a 67.4% probability victory. And I really like what I see in him statistically and stylistically. So let's cover all of that. Statistically, the reason that I like Grant Dawson here, he has a height advantage of 1 inch, not much, but still. He is 10 years younger than Diego Ferreira, and that is important. He has a 13% higher striking accuracy. He absorbs 1.4 less strikes per minute, lands 2.7 more takedowns on average, has an 8% higher takedown accuracy, and he lands 0.6 more submissions on average. That is a killer combination of amazing stats. Now, Grant Dawson, let's take a look at his total record. 22 wins, only 2 losses. That's very impressive. Out of his 22 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 13 have been submissions, and 4 were decision victories, which gives him a very high 82% finishing rate. Out of his only 2 losses, both of those were KO/TKO finishes, so he got caught, right? He does have 7 first-round finishes out of his 22 wins, which is a pretty good finishing rate, especially within just the first round. Recently, he has great momentum. He's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 2-fight win streak coming into this matchup. His most recent win was in October of 2024. The guy is very active. His most recent loss, October of 2023. Let's talk about all the stylistic things that I really like. First of all, it's no surprise the guy's young, right? You have about a 9 or 10 year difference, and that is just inevitably going to translate into better speed and reflexes. I think one thing that a lot of people don't touch base on is as you continue to age, you lose your ability to see punches coming as fast as they can, see kicks coming as fast as they can, and see takedowns coming in as fast as they can. Your reaction time slows down, and this has just been proven scientifically if you take a look at it. And I think that when you have that 10-year age gap, and I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it already statistically just swerves the confidence towards you to get a win. And I think that we're definitely going to see that here as well. I mean, you could tell just based on the market confidence in Grant Dawson, right? But let's talk about other things that really make me confident in him to give him a 74% probability and bump it up 7 above the prediction models. I really like the momentum he's carrying. I mean, he did it great. He had a great year in 2024. I mean, he had like 2 wins, and one of those was a finish. And I think that his confidence and his skill level, it's sharpened, it's high, it's exactly where I want it to be. He's also adaptable, which I like. I mean, he really learns from his past setbacks and continues to just adjust his strategy accordingly. And we saw that with some of his bounce back performances after his losses, and I do appreciate that in fighters. We've also seen him improve his striking over time and continue to really just enhance his stand-up game, right? And I think that's going to make him a more well-rounded threat against a guy like Ferreira. I like the cardio, and I like his cardio, and I like the pressure that he puts on his opponents. He's known for that crazy pressure and his aggression, and he also has a pretty good technical ability to control positions. And I think that paired with his cardio, that's massive. It's a significant factor, especially when it comes to those later rounds. I love to see that. Now, I will say both of these guys are pretty skilled when it comes to grappling, but Dawson, he has that takedown ability, and he has that really good control on the ground, and that is the decisive factor, which really makes me confident in the guy. And we also see that in the numbers statistically as well, and so I like to see that that convergence of data. It's just nice to see that it harmonizes stylistically and statistically. That's the beauty of it. Lastly, I like his mental resilience. I mean, he's shown his ability to face adversity, come back, and continue being strong and put on good performances. Not to stretch this out too much, final decision, Grant Dawson via decision. I don't think he gets the finish here. I think he's going to get the decision victory, and I think it's going to be pretty convincing if I'm being quite honest. For the next fight, we have Zachary Reese versus Cedric Dumas. Now, for this fight, I did end up going with Zachary Reese. I gave him a 73% probability of victory, which is very high and confident. Now, prediction models, they agreed. They gave him a 70.6% probability of victory, so I do like to see that consensus in the stats and what I see statistically, and so that is always a good thing. Now, the statistical reasons why I like Zachary: he has a height advantage of 2 inches, he lands about 3 more strikes per minute with an 11% higher striking accuracy, while also landing 2.77 more takedowns on average with a 20% higher takedown accuracy, while also landing 2.2 more submissions on average. So I love to see that statistical dominance on paper, right? We're going to talk about the stylistic advantages in a second. First, let's take a look at his record. 8 wins and only 1 single loss. Let's break down those 8 wins. 5 KO/TKOs, 2 submissions, and 1 decision victory. That gives him a crazy high 88% finishing rate. Now, his 1 single loss was a KO/TKO. He did get caught. He does have 7 first-round finishes out of his 8 wins. 7 within the first round. I need you guys to keep that in mind. Recently, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, so he's carrying a lot of momentum on his side. In fact, he's on a 2-fight win streak coming into this fight. Now, his most recent win was August of 2024, so this guy stays active. His most recent loss was back in December of 2023. Let's talk about the stylistic things that I really like in Zachary Reese. He's a very adaptable fighter. I mean, he's shown his ability to adjust his strategy when it comes to the fight. And what he does, for example, I mean, he implements the takedowns when he needs to, and really mixes that in when he sees that, his first game plan's not working. And again, I like to see that. He's also one of those power punchers. I mean, he has a lot of power in his hands, and I think that's going to pose a huge threat to a guy like Dumas. Now, I also like Reese's grappling skills. I think that's pretty obvious if you've seen his game plan and seen his fights, right? He's displayed his submission abilities in his career, very obvious, and I think that's going to be an inevitable advantage if and when the fight goes to the ground. He's also pretty durable as a fighter. He's not distracted. He's very, very focused when it comes to fighting and training. He's good at exploiting the weaknesses of his opponents, especially when it comes to guys who have had recent losses and stuff like that. I mean, he tends to target weaknesses and do well there. Based on everything I've seen about Zachary and based on the weaknesses that I know about Dumas, I'm thinking Zachary Reese gets the KO/TKO. That's where I'm headed for this fight. And I'm pretty confident in that call. I'm going to take Zachary Reese via KO/TKO, and that's the bottom line. For the next fight, we have Jailton Almeida versus Serghei Spivac. Now, for this fight, I did end up going with Almeida. I gave him a very confident 82% probability of victory. The prediction models also had a lot of confidence in him. They gave him an 86% probability of victory. I just knocked that down a bit because I had to normalize it. I think there was a lot of bias there. Especially when I look at the stylistic, key stylistic things. Now, let's talk about the statistical things that I like about Almeida. He does have a reach advantage of an inch here. He has a 15% higher striking accuracy, while he also absorbs 3 less strikes per minute. He lands 2.22 more takedowns on average, with a 5% higher takedown defense, while also landing 1.9 more submissions on average. His total record, 20 wins and only 3 losses. Out of his 20 wins, 7 KO/TKOs, 12 submissions, and 1 decision victory, which gives the guy an insane 91% finishing rate. Very important to keep that in mind. Let's break down his losses. So he has 3 losses, 2 of which were KO/TKOs, and the last one being a decision loss. Now, he does have 15 first-round finishes. Ladies and gentlemen, 15 first-round finishes out of his 20 wins. I need you to keep that in mind. Another key stat in this fight. Now, recently he's done well. He's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a win into this fight. Almeida's most recent win was back in June of 2024, just recently, relatively, right? And his most recent loss was back in March of 2024, same year, just a few months before. Let's talk about the stylistic things that I really like about Jailton Almeida in this fight. So, first thing I would say, superior grappling skills, and I think that's probably the most obvious thing in his fighting style, and if you study him. He's considered one of the most dangerous grapplers when it comes to this division, the heavyweight division. And I mean, the guy has great BJJ skills and submission abilities. I really like his aggressive takedown strategy that he constantly utilizes, and not only utilizes, but does very well in. He does not waste any time in attempting takedowns, and sometimes the guy just shoots within seconds as soon as the fight starts. It's hilarious, but he does really well with it. And part of the reason why is he has very dominant ground control. I mean, once the fight is on the ground, this guy is scary. He really excels in maintaining top position and just wearing his opponents down, and I like what I see when it comes to that. He's very consistent with it too. He's patient and he's precise. He has like this methodical approach when it comes to his groundwork and just setting up that ground and pound, that moment for ground and pound, right? And then eventually setting him up for submissions. He does that very, very well. It's like a funneling system that he's created. Now, what I like to see also, he's very versatile when it comes to his submission ability. Probably one of the best fighters in doing that. He's shown a lot of proficiency when it comes to different submission techniques, and I like that. He has that rear naked choke down, the arm triangle choke, all of that. He has pretty good cardio and endurance as well. I mean, he has a grappling heavy style, and so what he has to do as a fighter is conserve energy while tiring his opponents out, and he does that very, very well. He's also pretty good with speed and agility. He's kind of lighter than most heavyweights you would normally see, and I think that kind of allows him to outmaneuver certain fighters, and certain fighters as in Spivac specifically. I mean, Spivac's kind of on the thicker side compared to Almeida, and so I think Almeida's going to be able to kind of outmaneuver him as he continues to look to execute his game plan, right? I do like, psychologically speaking, his momentum and his confidence coming into this fight, so I think he has a little bit of a psychological edge, not to give that too much weight, but still. He's also adaptable. I mean, when it comes to the fights, what I like in him, he's more adaptable than I've seen Spivac be, and I like that. And he also has a crazy finishing instinct. Remember, 15 first-round finishes out of 20 wins. That is very, very important. So he capitalizes on those opportunities, and he gets the job done, and that's what you want to see, right? All in all, I'm taking Almeida via submission. I don't think that's a surprise. I think that's just a very confident thing. Now, MMA, random things end up happening, so worst case scenario, there's an upset, but it's definitely not to be expected. It's very rare that I go above the 80% mark when it comes to giving out probabilities of victory. So I do like what I see in Almeida, and I think he gets the job done. For the next fight, we have Payton Talbott versus Raoni Barcelos. Now, this is a very interesting fight. I ended up going with Payton Talbott here, and I'm giving him an 86.6% probability of victory. I really like what I see out of this guy, and I'll explain everything in a second. The prediction models really like what they see in terms of statistics as well, as they ended up giving him an 80.1% probability of victory in total. So I actually boosted that up and gave him more. I gave it a more confident reading. And there's a lot of reasons why. So firstly, when it comes to the statistics, Payton has a height advantage of 3 inches here. He's 11 years younger. He has a reach advantage of 3 inches as well. With that, he lands 3.16 more strikes per minute. He has a 4% higher striking accuracy. He absorbs 1.22 less strikes per minute with a 5% higher takedown defense. Now, his total record, 9 wins, 0 losses, undefeated. Out of his 9 wins, 7 KO/TKOs, 1 submission, and 1 decision victory, giving him an 89% finishing rate. Love to see it. Now, he does have 1 first-round finish out of his 9 wins, so he's not much of a first-round finisher as much as he picks his opponents apart, but he does end up getting the job done and finishes more times than not. So that second and third round is absolutely key when it comes to his game plan. Now, recently, of course, he's riding his 9-fight win streak. His most recent win, June of 2024. Let me talk about the stylistic things that I like in this kid. First of all, he's very young. He's 26 years old versus his opponent here who's 37 years old. And that's going to definitely give him an edge when it comes to speed, reflexes, and even recovery, which needs to be talked about, right? I also like his momentum and confidence. I think he has that psychological edge in this fight. He knows a lot of eyes are on him, and he's been doing very, very well. He's versatile as a fighter, which I really like. He's shown a lot of proficiency in striking, wrestling, and submissions, so he's a very well-rounded threat, and he's just getting started, which I love to see. He's also an adaptable fighter. He's able to adjust his strategy as well, which we've seen in my picks earlier. I really like seeing that adaptability. I wish I could almost measure it statistically, but he is an adaptable fighter, and I like that. He does have a bit of a size advantage here, at least in my opinion. He's kind of a large guy for a bantamweight, and I think that's going to be pretty good against a guy like Barcelos in terms of things like reach or strength, stuff like that. I also like Payton's finishing ability, which we talked a little bit about. He has that power. He's very precise as well, and that's a great combination. And he's able to find those fight-ending opportunities, and he does capitalize on those. He's also mentally tough. He has this background in very different sports, and his approach to fighting, it just shows that the guy is mentally at the right place, at least right now. We see fighters get distracted in the future, but right now, Payton is here, and he's very present. With that being said, he's very unpredictable. If you rewatch some of his fights, he's very creative with his striking. And I think that just makes him a very difficult opponent to prepare for and face. It keeps you on your toes, right? He also does pretty good training. He fights out of a Reno Academy of Combat, and I think that they're giving him some quality preparation for this fight based on what I've studied about them. He's also a hungry fighter, up and coming. He wants to please the crowd. Are you entertained is what he wants to say at the end of his fights. All in all, I think this one's very obvious. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I'd love to hear y'all's opinions and takes on fights. But I am going with Payton Talbott here via KO/TKO. I think he gets the finish here. I actually don't think it's going to be in the first round, though, and I think that's going to be key if you're looking for those props. Now, I am going to do my betting video later this week, so you will have that. But one thing that I wanted to say, just giving you guys a little bit heads up, look for that second or third round, right? I think that's going to be key and crucial in this fight. Payton Talbott is the decision, and it's gonna be via KO/TKO. That is the verdict. The next fight on the card is a scrambler fight. What was supposed to happen was Bogdan Guskov versus Johnny Walker, but what we ended up getting was Billy Elakena versus Bogdan Guskov. So for this fight, very obvious, I'm going with Bogdan here. Now, unfortunately, because of the last-minute switch and the guy making his UFC debut, Billy, right? I could not run both guys through my prediction models. It's just not possible. So let's just review the information we do have and make the best decision that we can, right? The odds are giving Bogdan a about a 72.4% probability of victory. Now, what I like about Bogdan, he has the height advantage of an inch here, but again, there's not a lot of statistical things I can compare. Let's look at Bogdan's total record since we have that. 16 wins, 3 losses. Out of his 16 wins, 14 of them were KO/TKO, and the remaining 2 were submission victories, which gives him a 100% finish rate. I like to see that. And out of his 3 losses, they're pretty much across the board. One's a KO/TKO loss, one's a submission loss, and one's a decision loss. He does have 12 first-round finishes out of his 16 wins. Recently, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he's currently on a 2-fight win streak. The most recent time that Bogdan won was back in April of 2024, and the most recent time he lost was in September of the year before, so 2023. But let's go ahead and talk about Billy Elakena and what we know about him so far. So he has a 7-win, 1-loss record, and his most recently, I mean, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights. He's on a 3-fight win streak. Most recently, he came off a KO/TKO victory within the first round, but the 2 fights before that, they were decision victories. The most recent one of those 2 being a split decision, and the third most recent fight was a unanimous decision victory. His only loss was a split decision loss, and that was back in 2022. I mean, he's not bad. He has about a 78-inch reach. But I'm still leaning towards Guskov, and then let's talk about the stylistic reasons as to what I like about Guskov. First of all, this is obvious. There's an experience advantage that Guskov has. I mean, he's obviously fought in the UFC before. He's faced tougher competition than whatever else is out there, right? And so that's one thing that goes in his favor. He also has really good knockout power that we've seen. I mean, he's shown that throughout his career, if I'm being honest, and he's just a constant threat throughout any moment in a fight if he catches you. He has a well-rounded skill set as well. He brings a lot of striking and grappling into his fights. He has good physical attributes. I mean, he has a good height, good reach, and he's good at controlling the distance and landing those strikes from the outside. He's very aggressive as a fighter as well. He really pushes the pace, looks for that finish, and overwhelms his opponents. And I do expect Elakena to be overwhelmed. I don't think he knows what he's up against. This is a very last-minute thing, right? He does have good training here, good momentum, and he's an adaptable fighter. Guskov, of course. All in all, I am going to take Guskov. I think he gets it done via KO/TKO. He was supposed to face Johnny Walker. That would have been an interesting fight, but we're getting this fight, and I think that Guskov is going to dominate. For the next fight, we have Kevin Holland versus Reinier de Ridder. Now, for this fight, I did end up going with de Ridder, and I ended up giving him a 54% probability of victory. It's narrow whenever you take a look at this fight and where people stand on it. I'm leaning towards de Ridder. I think that he's going to be able to defeat Kevin Holland, and let's talk about why. So statistically, de Ridder, he has a height advantage of an inch here, but more importantly, he has an 8% better striking accuracy. He absorbs 0.65 less strikes per minute. He lands 5.56 more takedowns on average. He has a 46% higher takedown defense, and he lands 0.7 more submissions on average. Keep in mind that's only coming off of one specific fight. It was that Fight Night fight on the Magny versus Practice card, and that was against Gerald Mearshart. This was just back in November, and so he does have some on paper advantages to Kevin Holland, although we haven't seen him be able to span that out in multiple UFC fights so that the averages are more meaningful. So I want to give you guys that context. Let's take a look at his record real quick. The guy has 18 wins and 2 losses. Out of his 18 wins, 4 were KO/TKOs, but here's the key. 12 were via submissions. The guy is amazing at submissions, and he has great technical knowledge. 2 of those were decision victories as well, giving him an 89% finish rate all in all. Very impressive stuff. His 2 losses were KO/TKO losses. He has 10 first-round finishes out of his 18 wins, so he does like to get the job done in the first round more times than not. Recently, he's done well. He's won 3 of his last 5 fights overall, and he's also coming off of 2 back-to-back wins into this fight. He used to be a champion at one champion. Gosh, I don't even know how to word that properly, but we're doing this live. I'm not about to edit that out. So His most recent win was just recently back in November of 2024. His most recent loss back in March of 2024. He's coming off of that submission win against Gerald Meerschaert. Before that, he had a KO/TKO victory against an opponent at UAE Warriors. That was back in July 2024. So he's been pretty active. He does well, but I think there's a lot of stylistic things that are going in his favor against a guy like Kevin Holland. First of all, let me talk about his background. He has a black belt in Judo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, both of them. So he has a huge advantage whenever it comes to groundwork against his opponents. And what we've seen before with Kevin Holland is when it comes to guys that have that grappling heavy and strong wrestling background, he kind of struggles with some of those guys that are very technically strong in those areas and also physically strong. And so that's going to be a key thing in this fight. There's also a submission threat when it comes to De Ridder. I mean, he's a constant threat when it comes to submissions. 12 of his 18 wins came via submission. And so Holland, I'm just scared that he's going to get caught with those. And it's obvious that De Ridder's game plan is going to be very heavily focused on grappling. And we've seen, like I said, Holland struggle with that. Now, this guy, like I mentioned, he is a former one championship champion. So he's carrying a lot of momentum, making his second fight in the UFC right now on a pay-per-view card. So a lot of eyes are going to be on him. He has a great opportunity here. And because we've seen his ability to control the fight, whether you're watching his previous one fights or you're watching his UFC fight, he's really good at controlling the fight and implementing his grappling skills and just dictating where the fight takes place. I think what that's going to end up doing against a guy like Holland is neutralize his striking. And so Holland's going to get a little bit frustrated in that because of that grappling heavy style. So it's going to be interesting how that dynamic plays out. But all in all, to make a decision clear here, I'm taking De Ridder, and I'm going to take him via submission. I think that's the most logical way to go about it. For the next fight, we have Beneil Dariush versus Renato Moicano. Now, for this fight, I am picking Renato Moicano. I ended up giving him a 77% probability of victory, all things considered. And the prediction models really liked him, too, against his opponent, Beneil Dariush. The prediction models gave him a 75.3% probability of victory. So the statistical reason why I like Renato Moicano here, he has a height advantage of an inch. He lands 0.64 more strikes per minute. He has a 1% higher striking accuracy, which I know is not much, but still. He has a 3% higher striking defense and a 10% higher takedown accuracy. So he has a lot of statistical advantages over Dariush on paper. Now, taking a look at Moicano's total record, 20 wins, 5 losses. Out of those 20 wins, 2 were KO/TKOs, 10 were submission victories, and 8 were decision victories, which does give him a 60% finish rate. But what that tells me when it comes to Moicano's game plan, he's a pretty balanced fighter. I mean, I know he doesn't get a lot of KO/TKOs, but when it comes to finding a finish and letting the fight get to a decision, he's pretty balanced. So he can control fights. He can also manage to get the finish when he sees the opportunity. So I like that versatility. Now, out of his 5 losses, 3 of those were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and 1 was a decision loss. He does have 4 first-round finishes out of his 20 wins. He's not huge on that first round, so important to keep that in mind. But he is carrying a lot of momentum with him. He has 4 wins out of his 5 most recent fights. In fact, he's on a 4-fight win streak coming into this fight. His most recent win was September of 2024, and his most recent loss was March of 2022. Let's talk about the stylistic things that I like in Moicano. So first of all, the guy is very confident. He's very analytical when it comes to fighting. We've seen that. If you don't know, he does YouTube videos. He breaks down fights. He gives his predictions. And I like the analytical things that he brings into his analysis. And it really translates over to when he does fight. And you could tell that when he's fighting, he's absorbing information that he's seeing and reading about his opponent in a very analytical sense. And so that's good. That tells me that he has good observation abilities in fights. Now, other things that I really like about him, we've seen improvements in his striking. Now, I know he's not a huge KO artist, right? But he has shown a lot of development in his striking game, which I think is going to pose problems against Beneil Dariush, who has been kind of subpar or, average or mediocre in the UFC compared to what people were hoping him to be. I know he has a lot of fans, though, so not to diss the guy at all, just being respectful. But still, he's been a little bit of a disappointment, respectfully. Moicano, I like his submission skills. He's very high-level BJJ black belt, in fact, and he has great submission abilities, and I like what I see in him when it comes to that. I like the pace and pressure he sets as well. I mean, he sets a very high and fast pace overall, which you might not feel, especially in that first round, because he doesn't get those finishes, but he keeps it on throughout the fight, and that is a lot of pressure, and it really throws your opponents off. Not only that, but while he's keeping pressure, he's really good with range control. I mean, he's probably one of my favorites when it comes to controlling the distance when it comes to fights, and I think that's gonna neutralize Dariush's offense. He's also adaptable, which I love to see in fighters. He kind of switches his game plan when he has to. He has different methods to victory. Even if he has to control the fight and just get the decision victory, he does do that well as finding the opportunities and getting the finish. He's also mentally tough as a fighter. I mean, he's been through a lot in his past and in past fights, and sometimes he nearly loses, but he comes back, and I like to see that in fighters when they take a bad situation and end up with the win, especially when there's a strategic move or strategic game plan that they do mid-fight to get that. I do appreciate that, and I do admire that, and Moicano is that guy. He's also motivated for this win. I think it's going to be a very important win in his career, and it's going to help him continue to grow, and a lot of eyes are going to be on him in this particular fight. He has to pass this test, right? And kind of put Beneil Dariush away. So that's going to be a very interesting fight. Now, if Dariush comes back, Dariush has a lot going for him as well. I'm not going to knock him. He does have a strong past when it comes to his experience and stuff that I recognize and appreciate. But the final verdict for this fight, it's going to be Renato Moicano. I think he actually catches Dariush. I'm going to take Renato Moicano via KO/TKO. I think it's going to be a little bit surprising. And what I'm really banking on is the improvements that he's made that I've seen, and also that, he's continued to improve. I think he's going to be able to exploit that and really take advantage of Beneil Dariush's, lack of defense here and there. Especially when you consider the range control and stuff like that, and just the pressure that Moicano is going to put on him. I could see him catching him. Let me know what you guys think, though. If you disagree, totally fine. I respect your opinions. Let me know what you think. Let's have a good discussion about it. For the next fight, we have a banger. We have Yuri Prochazka, the Samurai, versus Jamal Hill. For this fight, I am going for Yuri Prochazka here. I ended up giving him a 56.3% probability of victory. I wish that were more. It really just depends on his defense and if he's finally able to improve it, but I'm still thinking it leans towards him. And now the prediction models, they also agreed, but very narrowly. They ended up giving a 53.3% probability of victory. Let's talk about the statistical advantages that Yuri has. He is a year younger than Jamal Hill. He has a reach advantage of an inch as well. He also has a 1% higher striking accuracy. Other than that, Jamal Hill really holds the advantages on paper, but there's a lot of stylistic things that I like when it comes to Yuri Prochazka's game plan, and I'll talk about that in a second. First, let's look at the guy's total record. 30 wins, 5 losses. Out of his 30 wins, 26 of them were KO/TKOs. 3 were submissions and 1 was a decision victory, which gives the guy a 97% finish rate. Out of his 5 losses, 4 have been KO/TKOs, which is rough. 1 was a submission, and we know where a lot of those KO/TKOs came from. Alex Pereira. 2 of them recently came from Alex Pereira, and that really sucks for Yuri, right? But let's continue talking about the guy's record. So he does have that 1 submission loss as well. I mean, he's had 23 first-round finishes within his 30 wins, so he is a hard hitter, especially in that first round. If he catches you, you're done, basically. I mean, the guy, he knows how to hit hard. Recently, he's won 3 of his last 5 fights. He's done well overall. Currently, he is coming off of a loss into this fight, but I think this fight's going to be really good for him. His most recent win was back in April of 2024. That was a banger of a fight, probably one of the best cards that we're going to have in a long time, UFC 300. His most recent loss was back in June of 2024. He stays pretty active overall, which lets him improve. His defense is a huge concern. I'll just say that right off the bat. But let's talk about the things that are working towards his favor and making me choose him in this matchup. First thing, his unorthodox fighting style. I mean, he's a very unique fighter, very unpredictable, and I think that's going to pose a lot of challenges for Hill, who's more of a conventional style fighter. Now, Yuri, he's wild. I mean, he has this dynamic striking style. It's based on like his instinct and his vibes, right? It's not very traditional technical striking, especially not what you see from a boxer or a kickboxer. He's just very unique and diverse is the best I could say. I highly advise you watch his previous fights, especially prior to UFC. I think you're going to enjoy all those highlights in those fights, so definitely watch those. Now, that unorthodox approach, the reason why it's important, it really confuses opponents. It disrupts their game plan, and I think that once you do that to Jamal Hill, the needle starts tipping in your favor, is what I'll say. I also like Yuri's mental fortitude overall. I mean, he has a huge dedication to mental preparation when it comes to fighting. He likes to get in the zone. He likes to meditate. He really puts himself in uncomfortable positions. And just from a philosophical or psychological perspective, that's really good. He does things like sensory deprivation. He does things like 3-day fasts in dark rooms, all sorts of crazy stuff that this guy puts himself through just to get his mind right, get himself in a lot of control. I wish he would put a lot of effort into his defense and improving that. And I'm thinking he has done that, especially for this fight. And I think his camp has encouraged that as well. I mean, when 2 of your most recent losses have came via KO/TKO to the same guy, that really just highlights that, hey, there's a problem with this guy's defense and his ability to read what his opponent, who might be more skilled than him, is doing. Now, not to sound very corny, but one thing I like about Yuri is that whole samurai mindset he brings. So he's very influenced by Japanese samurais and stuff like that. And so he brings that warrior mentality into fighting. And, besides that being very badass, I think that there's a lot of discipline that comes with that. And it's a unique perspective. It's cool. It makes him a little bit intimidating. I'm not going to touch base too much on that, but I think that is respectable and it brings discipline to his overall game plan. But let's talk about his skills, right? So he does have great technical skills. For example, like Robert Whitaker said, he possesses more precise and accurate striking compared to Hill. And so that kind of technical advantage, it's going to allow him to land more effective shots and kind of control the pace of the fight. Whereas Jamal Hill, he's used to guys that are more of your traditional style fighters. He's not really going to be able to read Yuri. One thing I do like about Yuri, if I'm being quite honest, it's his overall durability. I know the guy got finished twice, right? But he is a durable fighter overall, and he kind of has it in him to get a comeback victory. He's turned fights around when he's behind. We've seen that even recently, right? He's resilient. He's kind of a constant threat. Basically, if you don't get the guy down and out, he can be a threat, especially in later rounds. He can catch you off guard and just be a problem, especially because he's just unpredictable. He has good conditioning as well. I like his training methods. They're very intense. The dude punches trees like 5 billion times a day or something, right? No, I think it's like 500 times a day, but he is out there punching trees. He's great when it comes to like physical conditioning and just mental conditioning and stuff like that. All in all, Jamal Hill, he has his own strengths for sure. He has a lot of like statistical advantages as well, especially on paper. But all in all, and the machine learning models seem to agree, I'm leaning towards Yuri Prochazka. I think he's skilled, and just because he's faced a couple losses to Alex Pereira, I don't think that really strips him of the skills that he has shown more times than he hasn't, which is why I encourage you to go watch his other fights so that you can get a good sense of that. But all in all, decision will be Yuri Prochazka via KO/TKO. I think it's not going to come early on. I think it's going to be a little bit later, but he's going to be able to catch Jamal Hill, and Jamal Hill is not going to see it coming. That's what I'm expecting. Final verdict, Yuri Prochazka. The next 2 fights, I'm shocked, are on the same card. Those are both main event, very high-level fights, very technical fights that, I mean, probably it's going to be some of the best fights that the world has ever seen when it comes to technical skills. We're going to be remembering this fight. Just like there was Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev. These are going to be that level of fighting because all 4 of these next guys that I'm going to cover are highly skilled. All 4 of them. So first, let's start with the co-main event. We have Merab Dvalishvili versus Umar Nurmagomedov. And if that last name, Nurmagomedov, sounds familiar, I'm sure a majority of you know, but that's because he is the cousin of Khabib Nurmagomedov, a huge name in MMA and grappling. And so, this guy is his cousin. He trains with him. He has a lot of the same skills mirrored in this smaller division. So let's go ahead and talk about results. So the prediction models ended up giving him an 86.1% probability of victory. Extremely confident. Now I had to normalize that just a little bit because Merab Dvalishvili is insanely talented and very, very durable. If his last fight showed us anything, it's the fact that he's very, very durable. So I ended up knocking it down just a little bit. I gave Nurmagomedov an 83.5% probability of victory. Still insanely confident, right? And that's not to knock Merab Dvalishvili down. That guy is insanely talented. So let's talk about all the reasons and insights that I have for this fight and why I'm so confident on Umar. So first of all, the statistical reasons why I like Umar He has a height advantage of 2 inches in this matchup. He's 5 years younger than Merab. He has a reach advantage of 1 inch. He lands 0.11 more strikes per minute with a 21% higher striking accuracy, which is very important. He also absorbs 0.95 less strikes per minute, also very important. He has a 7% higher striking defense, also very important when it talks about striking advantages. He has a 14% higher takedown accuracy, a 20% higher takedown defense, and he lands 0.1 more submissions on average. A lot of statistical advantages on paper. Let's talk about Nurmagomedov's total record. 18 wins, no losses. He's undefeated. In his 18 wins, 2 of them have been via KO/TKO, 7 were submission victories, and 9 were decision victories, which gives him a 50% finish rate. Very balanced, right? But also very, very skilled. 7 submissions, insane. Now, he does have 5 first-round finishes out of his 18 wins, but he's not huge on that first round. He's way better when it comes to continuing to wear down his opponents and going on later in the fight. That's where he really exhausts guys and gets that victory. Recently, of course, 18-fight win streak, undefeated. Most recent win in August of 2024. Let's talk about the stylistic things that are leaning towards Umar's favor here. First of all, like I said, all those key statistics, there was one common theme in all of them. They were all related to striking. The reason that I really like Umar, it's his superior striking technique. He really has a dynamic and well-rounded striking arsenal. I mean, he does a lot of like dangerous strikes. Like he has these question mark kicks, his effective teep, stuff like that. He's really good at stuff like that. And when you pair that with his grappling pedigree, right? Again, a guy who trains with his cousin, Khabib Nurmagomedov, he has that world-class wrestling. He has those submission skills that have proven themselves time and time again. He has the strength. He has the technique down, and I think that might neutralize some of Merab's takedown heavy approaches. I mean, Merab's not going to be able to walk over this guy completely like he is with other guys who rely too much on striking. This is not that guy. He also has a very calculated fighting style. I mean, Umar, he's methodical, he's patient, he picks his opponents apart, he frustrates a lot of his opponents, and I think that's going to really frustrate Merab as well, and in doing so, he's going to really control the pace of the fight. Psychologically speaking, Umar, extremely confident, undefeated, so he does have that confidence coming into this. Whereas Merab, he's lost 4 times, but he's done very well in this in this part of his career. He's had a great stretch here. Now, another thing I like about Umar, which I kind of touch base on, he's very versatile as a fighter. He's able to fight very effectively from both orthodox and southpaw stances. And I can't say that about a lot of fighters, but he is one of those guys that does that, and he adds a lot of unpredictability to his game as well. Although he's methodical, he is unpredictable, and that is a killer combination. There's also that submission threat that is just going to be looming constantly. He has a lot of rear naked choke victories. He's just that constant submission danger when it comes to fights, especially when the fight goes to the ground. He has a lot of momentum, obviously. He's had a dominant win over top-ranked opponent Corey Sandhagen, who is one of my favorite fighters. I enjoy watching Corey Sandhagen. I enjoy listening to his philosophy about fighting, training, his mentality and all that. But he did get that win against him, and so he's entering this fight with a lot of confidence and, his head held high, right? A lot of pride and confidence. Now, when it comes to handling pressure, Umar is very calm. He's kind of scary calm. He has this calm demeanor, and he has a good experience when it comes to high-profile fights. And that's just kind of the Nurmagomedov way of doing things. And they handle pressure really well. They execute their game plan very well. And they're very technically sound. In fact, they have really good fight IQ overall. Now, when you take a look at a guy like Islam Makhachev, he does take more risks than your average Dagestani fighter. But in general, very technical guys overall, very high fight IQs no matter what, and most of the time risk averse, except for Islam, who has kind of mixed it up, especially in that Dustin Poirier fight. That was very interesting, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's wrap up this fight. The final verdict for this fight, it's going to be Umar Nurmagomedov, and I think he's going to get it done via decision. I think we're going to see a masterful 5 rounds, very, very technically sound. To some of you, it might be boring because one guy's not knocking the other guy out immediately, but trust me when I say there is a beauty to technicality in fighting, and these two guys are going to display some of the highest level grappling and technical skills that we've seen. It is a true pleasure to witness this fight. For the next fight, we have our main event, one of the toughest tests for Islam Makhachev to this day. We have Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan. For this fight, I am leaning towards Islam Makhachev. I don't think that Arman will get it done, and I'll talk about all the reasons why. I'm not saying it's not going to be competitive, but I'll explain it. So, first of all, an important thing to keep in mind is that this is a rematch between these two guys. They've previously fought back in 2019. That was April 2019. That was about 6 years ago now. And in that first fight, Islam Makhachev, he did come out victorious via unanimous decision. And, that was Arman Tsarukyan's UFC debut. Very, very tough debut. Now, despite that loss, Tsarukyan actually impressed a lot of people with that performance. And he really tested and pushed Makhachev in a lot of aspects of the fight. It was a great fight, and it's very important to watch that fight to understand both of these guys, the context of their history, and also how much they've improved. Since then, Makhachev, he did become UFC lightweight champion, of course, and he currently is, and he's on a 14-fight win streak. Now, Tsarukyan, since then, he went 9-1 since that loss, and he's had notable wins over guys like Charles Oliveira and Beneil Dariush. And so this rematch, of course, has very high stakes. Makhachev, he is defending his lightweight championship against the now #1 ranked contender Tsarukyan, and so this fight, you could definitely expect it to be way more competitive, given Arman Tsarukyan's growth and even Makhachev's growth. And now he has a full training camp too, unlike that short notice nature in that first fight that they had. So a lot of implications in this fight. Very interesting history. I wanted to give you guys that context before I dive in. So I did end up going with Islam Makhachev, and I gave him an 80.1% probability of victory. Now, the prediction models really agreed with that. They also hit him at that 80% mark, and I didn't want to change that because I felt like that was a fair reading for him, all things considered. Statistically, the reason that Islam is likely to win here, he has a height advantage of 3 inches, he has an 11% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 0.3 less strikes per minute, he has a 8% better striking defense, he has a 16% higher takedown accuracy, and a 15% higher takedown defense. Those are really good stats paired together. Looking at his total record, 26 wins and 1 loss. Out of those 26 wins, 5 were KO/TKOs, 12 were submissions, and 9 were decision victories, which gives him a 65.4% finish rate. That one single loss that he had was a finish. It was a KO/TKO, and it was a long time ago. He's had 10 first-round finishes out of his 26 wins. He can get it done in that first round, but it doesn't always end up going that way. But the guy's a threat throughout all rounds of the fight. All 5 rounds, the guy's a constant threat. And also very versatile in his way of finishing fights or even getting a decision. He's just very versatile. He's on that 14-fight win streak since his previous loss. His most recent win was back in June of 2024, and that one single loss that he's had was in October of 2015. Let's talk about the stylistic things that I like in this fight and why I am very confidently leaning towards Islam Makhachev. So, first of all, superior grappling. Makhachev, he has really good grappling skills, and of course, he trains with those Dagestani guys, Khabib, Umar, all these guys. His skills are actually regarded as some of the best technically. When you talk about the technical skills, it's some of the best in MMA in general. I mean, he has a great ability to control his opponents on the ground, and he maintains that dominant position. He's just very exceptional at that. Even against very high-level grapplers, he's shown the ability to really impose his will and just neutralize their offense when it comes to grappling, right? Now, in striking, it's interesting because he's not really known as much of a striker, but we have seen that he has significantly improved his stand-up game. He's very patient and technical when it comes to his grappling entries, but his ability to blend in his striking with his wrestling seamlessly, that makes him very unpredictable. I mean, when he was first just a grappling threat, the guy was dangerous as is. The fact that he's also introduced striking improvements to his game, it's made him very difficult to figure out and just dominantly defeat. You might get lucky with the guy, but it's very, very difficult to defeat him, right? He has really good experience against elite level opponents. Charles Oliveira, who is extremely talented, Alexander Volkanovski, who at one point just seemed unbeatable, and Dustin Poirier, which he did struggle along with Dustin Poirier. I mean, because Poirier is that guy. All of those guys that I just named are insanely talented fighters. I'm a huge fan of all of them. But Dustin Poirier was really giving him a run for his money, and so keep that in mind. But I think he learned a lot from that. And I think that as Islam continues to mature as a fighter, he's going to take less risks. He's going to become risk averse, and he's really going to hunt after that victory, especially when you take a look at a guy like Arman Tsarukyan versus Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier, he's kind of your pocket style fighter, boxer. You know, I think a lot of pride and ego got in the way of Islam wanting to stand and bang with him sometimes. But when it comes to a guy as technically sound as Arman Tsarukyan, as flexible and dangerous as Arman Tsarukyan, as unpredictable as Arman Tsarukyan, you cannot take unnecessary risks. And I think that Islam definitely knows that. I think his team was very adamant in making sure he doesn't do that in his strategy for this fight. Speaking of strategy, I mean, Islam has one of the best fight IQs that I've seen in a fighter. And I'm not just saying that in the air. You can see the way that he executes his game plans. It's almost perfect against certain opponents. And he makes those small tactical adjustments throughout the fight. He's adaptable. Love to see all of that. And he really exploits his opponent's weaknesses and just it doesn't really give him a chance, right? I like his pressure and his pace that he sets as well. A lot like his friend, what he calls his brother, his mentor, Khabib. Makhachev, he really excels at applying that relentless pressure on his opponents. That wears you down, and I think that's going to wear Tsarukyan down both physically and definitely mentally over the course of a 5-round fight. I can almost imagine how it is facing a guy like this. I mean, at some point you must feel like God, there's no way to defeat this guy. What do I do, right? And that's where your mental strength takes a little bit of a toll. Now, one thing I like about Islam's skill set also is his defensive skills. He does really good when it comes to defensive wrestling and grappling, some of the most top-notch skills in the UFC as a whole. And so that makes it very difficult for opponents to put him down and just put him in very bad positions. And I think that's going to neutralize a little bit of Tsarukyan's grappling offense, which I know Tsarukyan is really banking on, but I think that Makhachev has what it takes to really neutralize that. So I think by leveraging a lot of those intangibles in this fight, Islam will get the dominant win all in all. Final verdict for this fight, Islam Makhachev via decision. I don't think he's going to get the finish. I think we're going to get great 5 rounds of technical fight, but ultimately Makhachev via decision is the verdict. And with that, those are all of the fights for this weekend's event. I hope you all enjoyed the analysis and that your bets hit. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos. Running this data, analysis, prediction models, and creating charts and graphs takes hours every day and week, so your support is always appreciated. Please also check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me through there. There's a $10 a month contribution option and a premium $20 a month option, which comes with early access to all of the analysis from this video, as well as promising underdogs, favorites, prop bets, and all of the extra data analysis and stats as well. This analysis, information, and these stats will help you with your bets, and it'll help support my efforts to continue providing and expanding content for you all. So please check out that Patreon if you want to show me some love and help me out there. Thank you all once again for watching, and as always, see you guys in the next one.